All right, hello everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of A Sip of Knowledge with Lou Bryson and Liz Rhodes, plus this week's special guest, Maria Pearman. She's the author of Distillery Finance, among a few other books. I'm sure your host will get into all of that more very soon. Before I turn things over, real quick, I'm Will Hookinga from Zavvy.co, and just want to point out a couple of ways you can interact with your hosts and their guests throughout the live stream today. So on your right, you'll see a chat box. Feel free to say hello. Let us know where you're joining us from around the world. There's also a little button at the bottom that says ask a question. So if you have any specific questions that come up throughout the presentation, just enter them in down there, hit the button, and I'll be keeping an eye out for those. And last but not least, feel free to invite anyone you know to join us. There's a share button at the top that makes it easy to do that. But with that out of the way, Liz, Lou, the floor is yours now.
Liz, please.
Amazing. So I'm kicking things off today. So Will, as always, thank you so much for being our producer and setting all this fabulous stuff up. We've got an interesting show today. We've got a special guest, which we'll dig into in just a second. But before we do, I just wanted to say, hey, I'm Liz Rhodes. I actually just got a haircut. It's my first haircut since pre-COVID, and I got 10 inches off, if believe it or not.
And yet it's still below the sight line. That's amazing.
And it's so below. And Will was saying no one knows anyway, so move on. Okay. Hey everyone, thanks for joining. I'm Liz Rhodes, technical distiller and spirit consultant. I have over a decade experience in alcoholic beverage, spanning across several different types, product and spirit types, including beer, rum, vodka. However, my particular favorite and expertise, of course, is in whiskey. That's what the show's about. I spent most of my career at a tiny little mom and pop shop known as Diageo, but am now currently director of whiskey ops and R&D at Whistle Pig Whiskey, which is super exciting. And I also, on the side, run a little consulting company called Spirit Safe Consulting. And I think that's it for me. Lou?
Oh, thanks, Liz. I am Lou Bryson, whiskey writer and beer writer as well, which will come into play this show for a change. I spent 20 years as a managing editor of Whiskey Advocate magazine, currently freelancing and plugging my book, Whiskey Masterclass, an unsung, thank you, Liz, an unsung hero of whiskey writing, and my classic book, Tasting Whiskey, which surprisingly people still want, even though it's been out for 6 years, no more than 6 years, because I wrote it to be timeless, and it was the smartest move I ever made. I'm telling you, I'm getting out of the whole like review thing and never doing another book like that again. Today's whiskey. Today I am drinking a wonderful glass of Michter's 10-year-old bourbon. This is the latest release. Wow, it is. I just love this stuff. It really is, which, is so amazing and so annoying to some people because this still isn't their own make. This is carefully sourced whiskey. I just think their
There's something
business model has been really interested. Absolutely. I know it annoys some people. I just like it when it's in the glass. So anyway, that's enough of me and my whiskey. Liz, please introduce our guest.
Sure. Thanks, Lou. So we're actually taking a little bit of a left turn or what have you, but we're super excited. Today on our session, we have Maria Pearman, CBA. Thank you so much for joining us. This is our first finance person we have.
I know we're going where this podcast has never gone before.
We're super excited to kind of chat through. She just launched a new book, right, May?
Yeah.
It just launched, Distillery Finance. However, finance is one of the things.
Woo!
Oh, there we go.
How about that?
Finance is one of those things that people don't like to talk about, but is super critical, I feel like, in our business. But Maria is going to be here to talk all about her career and how she's helped so many people. She has 14 years experience as a CPA. She did launch a book. She's been working in the brewing sector before the distilling. She's about a decade in the brewing sector as well. And you also did a brewing book, right? For
Yep, it's called Small Brewery Finance, and
small
the
brewing.
Brewers Association published that in 19.
Okay. So we're super excited to have her on today. And with that, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks.
Um, so we
The usual opening question. Yeah.
the usual opening question. How did you get into this mess?
It was not planned. It wasn't planned. In fact, accounting at all wasn't planned.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's the last place I thought I would be. If you asked me 20 years ago, the last place I went to, I'm originally from South Carolina, and I went to the College of Charleston, which, now is supposedly a good school, but when I went, it was like a joke. So it's hard for me to come around to the fact that College of Charleston is now a quote unquote good school. But anyway, so when I was there, I was majoring in fun, and my declared major was arts management. So I really wanted to be in the business side of the arts, and that degree was preparing me to, run a theater company or run an art gallery or manage an artist's career, something like that. And then as I got closer to graduating, I realized that most of those positions would be grant funded. And I did not want to be in a position where I'd have to be like lobbying for my job every grant cycle and having the instability of that. So I was kind of disenchanted, but I was so close to finishing my degree, I just went ahead and finished up. And I instead of going and taking my career down that like nonprofit arts trajectory, I actually went into radio, and then I was in the music business for about 7 years in various capacities. I worked as a DJ, I did some production, I worked at a live music venue, I worked for a record label, I worked for a music store, I booked bands for a while, like all of this stuff that was super fun when you're in your 20s, but then you kind of get to a place and you're like, oh, I better get a real job. So I had one. Oh, go ahead, Liz.
I was just gonna say, what got you into music? Like that?
Have always loved it. And I mean, when I was in high school, I wanted to be an audio engineer. I wanted to be the person who was at the table, turn this level up, bring this level, blah, blah, blah. So that's really what I wanted to do. And then I got it in my head that there would be too much science involved, and I didn't want to do that. So anyway, I kind of, and then my dad was an artist, so I kind of have always been close to the arts and had an appreciation for it, but I've always loved business too. So when I found arts management as a degree, it was like, oh, okay, this is right up my alley. So I thought. So.
Yeah, both my kids want to be writers. I feel like I've failed them somehow. Have I not been truthful with you?
Well, that sort of hinges, like what you're talking about, kind of hinges on the whole crux of my I guess my personal mission or reason for being, which is, doing what we're passionate about makes our lives fulfilling. But you got to have the business side of it to let the passion flourish. And I feel like my personal mission is to help these small business owners in industries that are fueled by passion. So my clients are artisans first and business people second, or third or fourth. And so my mission is to help them create a business foundation and take away the problem areas for them so that they can let more of their craft flourish. And so that's kind of the whole crux of why I do what I do. But so coming back around, I was in, figured out I need to get a real job. And when I was in college, I took one accounting class simply because I had to, and I wanted to get as far away from it as possible because it seemed like the most boring thing on the planet. And so, fast forward, I'm mid 20s, realizing I need an exit strategy from radio. And I thought, okay, well, what do I want to do? And I had always heard, do what you love and the money will follow. So I'm making a list of all the things that I'm interested in, and the list was very long. And I thought, and at the time I was married, and my husband said, I think you need to think about accounting, because I was also the dork who would get my bank statement in the mail and make hand-drawn charts and graphs about how I spent my money, like off the bank statement. So, he was seeing something that I wasn't ready to accept about myself. So, long story short, I went back to school. I got a second degree in accounting, and then I went on to earn my CPA, and then I was in public accounting. So at this point, I was living in the Northwest. I was in Portland, and I was doing taxes in an accounting firm. Because we're in Portland, we had a lot of breweries, and I got handed some of those tax returns to do. And I saw that these folks would spend more with our firm to get their finances right at the end of the year in order to do the tax return than they spent on the tax return itself. And I thought, this is crazy. Like, these people have no idea how their business is performing until like 4 or 5 months after the end of the year. How are they making decisions? How are they running their business? And I saw that there was an opportunity in the market.
Poorly.
Poorly at best. Like, there's a market for contract controllers who know the industry. And, quite frankly, it was more filling the need of being able to speak to these business people in their language and meet them where they are. I mean, I swear 9 times out of 10, I feel like the disconnect with accountants is communication, is language. And, the client and the accountant are speaking 2 different languages. And so really, for me, it was identifying that opportunity. So I thought, wow, there's so many breweries in Portland, I could probably make a living doing this. So I had that thesis. I got one primary key client, and brewing and distilleries, but really the brewing industry is so word of mouth related. People just it's very collaborative. People share information about who they're working with, what's working, what's not, etc. So I did a good job for brewery A, and that spread to brewery B, and so on and so on. And until the point where it really built into a real deal. And when I started, I left the public accounting firm where I'd grown up and started my own business. And I thought it would be a really small operation, but we grew to 15 people, and we had clients all over the country with this specialty expertise. And then that got so large that I was the only owner of it. And that was so large I couldn't, effectively manage it because I had employees, I had clients, I was the only person signing tax returns, et cetera, et cetera. So I needed to fold that back into a larger organization. So I folded my practice into a larger CPA firm. And so that's where we are now. So I lead the food and beverage, or I lead the beverage alcohol division within the food and beverage practice at a CPA firm in Los Angeles. So I just moved down about 6 months ago, and am actually really loving it. A lot of people like to dog LA, but it's fun. It's a big city. It's got a lot going on. It's eye-opening for me, but I'm really enjoying it right now. And still, our client base is around the country. And then so one more piece about the evolution is, so started in breweries, but that kind of quickly became an expansion into distilleries too, because the rise of craft distilling as an industry, and hand in hand with that, my brewery clients were expanding as well. So now they were becoming distillers also, and that kind of forced an expansion of services as well. And the way beverage alcohol is going these days, it is just it seems like everybody does everything. And there's such a disruption of products and innovation, and the lines are really being blurred more than they ever have been before.
RTDs, right? And canned cocktails?
Yeah. That's prime example.
And that's a good, that's a good distinguishing point is beer based versus spirit based. And I don't know how that, again, I'm sure it affects 100%, it affects kind of FET and that sort of thing. But do you find that being a piece of conversation with some of your clients?
Yeah, definitely. So when you think about the broader market in which these companies operate and the rise of RTDs, it is interesting on a couple fronts. I think the first point is how the consumer perceives the product, and in the occasions in which they're enjoying RTDs. So with canned cocktails, those are things that the consumer is picking up, and more likely than not, they're enjoying them in occasions similar to places where they would drink beer. It comes in a can, it's like a single serving. And so now you have a vessel in which spirits are being consumed in a more traditional beer manner. And that is, you could say confusion. Maybe it's not confusion, or maybe it's expansion of how the consumer thinks about spirits. But the other way that this impacts business is, as you mentioned, with excise tax. So, the canned cocktail, if it's spirits based, then the taxes on that are at the spirits rate. And there's a big movement. You guys may have talked about this on another podcast, on another episode, but there's a big movement from the spirits community right now to reform excise tax and bring it down, especially on these RTDs, because the argument is consumers are experiencing them in the same way as they do beer, and it's a competitive disadvantage for us to have to pay this higher tax on a product where beer is consumed in the same way. From the consumer's perspective, it's the same type of product, but now we have a higher hurdle that we have to cross. So there's actually a big movement afoot right now to try to bring some reform into play for that spirits tax rate. And then a third way. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I think I was just thinking about some of the products that I've launched, or consulting projects that I'm working on right now too. And it's the outlets, right? And it's the tax.
Yes.
However, I feel more strongly about the spirit-based products because I know they're more stable as a scientist, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard for me to reconcile the discrepancy in FET or the outlets. So it
Yeah.
sounds like there's some movement.
Yeah. That's a big piece of current lobbying efforts from industry organizations. And a third major way this is affecting business is in the distributor relationships, because you might now, if you're a distillery who has an RTD, you might now want to put that on a truck that distributes beer, because the beer distributor is going to be better keyed in terms of how to merchandise that in the environment in which it's going to be sold. In other words, they're going to know how to put it on the shelf, make it attractive, show up in the same way as a similar beer product would show up, and therefore have a better results in terms of pull through on the shelf. So now you get in a situation where people who are spirits makers, distilleries, they are now engaging with distributors who are beer houses, and the contracts for beer distributors and spirits distributors are different. The commonplace aspects of it, and particularly around the buyout clauses, and so it is causing a lot of headaches. It's causing a lot of I guess it can get you into a pickle down the road if you don't understand the effects of these contracts before you sign them. And if you don't understand that beer distributors and spirits distributors operate in, under sort of different rules of engagement, then that can get you in trouble down the line. So, and that's another place where this RTD thing and the kind of different products that are coming to market is causing a lot of disruption. And so, long story short, it makes for a very interesting business environment for all these producers. There's a lot going on right now.
And there's all the state differences on top of that.
Yep. Yep. And to that point, to dive into more about the differences in state rules, like direct to consumer sales as prime example, I think right now there are 11 states that allow shipping into their states from out of state producers. So, you almost have to have another full-time body on staff to keep up with all that if you're going to play in that realm. There are services like Speakeasy that will overlay on top of the 3-tier system, and they provide, DTC. They're going to ship your product and put it on someone's doorstep, but it really is just an overlay on top of the 3-tier system that's already there. But that whole scenario, I think there is so much change to come in terms of, our regulatory environment. And with COVID, we had all these temporary changes to rules. My opinion is that was probably kicking the door open a little bit on these rules. And now that the door's been kicked open, there's going to be more and more changes. It could be a long road. And the downside is that distributors have pretty well-pocketed lobbying organizations. But it is interesting to watch how this all unfolds. I mean, ultimately, I believe that the consumer preference will prevail. And so, what you might see is distributors who are buying these D2C platforms like BTC, et cetera. And that's already happening. But, it's so interesting to watch this dynamic industry evolve.
I found it interesting when I found out that there were beer houses that were able to carry spirits and decided they didn't want to. And I think a lot of it with the RTDs, it's going away. And now they're finding themselves getting into that market. And I think that's going to change things too.
Yeah. I mean, anytime that an old dog has to learn new tricks from an industry perspective, it will shake things up. Yeah. It's a good time to be here, and it's a good time to be a service provider to the industry. And like one of the things that I love about what I do is I will see specific scenarios across my portfolio of companies that I work with as clients, and then I can consolidate everything that I'm seeing and bring the best of the best in terms of best practices or ways of thinking about business to the next client. So it's interesting because I can get a broad canvas and then kind of pick the most effective ways of doing business and then apply that going forward. It's fun. I love it.
So obviously, you just launched your book in May, and maybe we could dig into a little bit more about what that book entails and what you're trying to achieve and what sort of clients you're working with.
Yeah.
Who's the publisher on that? I know you said BA did the beer one, but
yeah, it's ADI.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they've got
hey, Eric.
They've got White Mule Press, which is their publishing arm.
Oh,
and so White Mule did the book.
Nice.
Yeah. It was, they reached out after the beer book came out and said, we think this would be a good idea for distillers too. So yeah, it's there, and you can get it on the ADI website or on Amazon. But
I was curious because the cover looked like a BA book. That's why I was.
Interesting. Yeah.
There's a similarity. Yeah. But
yeah, back to kind of what I mentioned at the top about my mission, is to help alleviate barriers for these craftspeople so they can bring more of their excellence into the world. And so this is written for anyone who is responsible for the financial performance of a distillery, and whether that be an owner, a CEO, a general manager, it's written for those people. And most of the principles applied in here are going to resonate with smaller organizations because it's like an accounting 101 plus a advice about how to practically put it into practice. So I think best audience is going to be smaller or younger distillers who are earlier in their corporate life cycle and need to kind of nail some of these fundamentals as they move forward. But I really talk about some of the challenges of having a distillery and then making sense of the financial data. I was talking about the communication issues between accountants and clients, and it really does feel like you're speaking a different language sometimes. So trying to present this information in a way that resonates with someone who doesn't have a financial, bent mind. So it'll talk a lot about designing your chart of accounts in order to generate useful reports. It really doesn't matter what's on those reports if you can't make sense of it. So I want to, arm people with tools that allow them to structure the financial data in a way that they understand, that allows them to make better managerial decisions. I mean, when you're looking at a financial report, that's just a summary of what happened in the past. But what really matters is how you take that data and use it to move forward into the future.
Translate that into how we're operating for the next shift or for the next campaign or what have you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the things that I think is most important for any business, but is writing a budget and a proper budget writing process, because really it is the best management tool that you can have. Because if you start with the process from the very top, where you're explaining the vision of the company, maybe it's going to be a 5-year vision, or it could be even longer term than that. And then you start with that idea and you're cultivating buy-in about what should our near-term goals be to support this long-term vision. And you're including your leadership team and you're getting everybody's thoughts around it. You're going to have so much more engagement and interest in adhering to the budget. So the budget is a major piece. I go into that a lot, like how to structure the budgeting calendar and what are the steps along the way. But really, the intent isn't to build this financial model as an outcome. It's more about aligning your team towards corporate goals. And then once you do that, it just creates much more congruence among your team. Then when you're looking at your reports at the end of the month, if you've got a budget versus actual and something missed, the intention isn't to spank the person who missed their number. It's about, let's look at this difference. Why is it different? And how can we take that information and move forward with it?
Do you have, and I think all of that is great because, and I think, especially like a lot of the distilleries I work with, but I'm sure Lou's experienced this too. And it's like, you don't know what you don't know, right?
Mm.
Do you have any sort of, in terms of setting, like, let's talk about KPIs, right?
Mhm.
Do you
Yeah.
have, I'm sure you have in the book, how do we actually set KPIs and what does that look like?
Yeah, there's a whole section in there about that. And KPIs are wonderful because they're like shorthand for how the business is doing. Like you can look at one number and it's going to reflect all these other aspects that are kind of deep in the financial statements. So I love KPIs. And it is, I mean, you hear this analogy all the time because it's true. It's like the dashboard when you're driving your car, or, steering the rocket ship. What do you need to have your eyes on? And so the answer in terms of designing your KPI dashboard is that it's going to be different for every company and what's important to you. And again, I would go back to what's the vision of the company. Once you get crystal clear about the vision and the purpose, then that will inform where do we need to have our eyes on which numbers. And I'll give you an example that might make this more tangible. If you've got Distillery A who wants to build a company that they are going to build sales and then position themselves to be acquired in 5 to 10 years, that's scenario one. Scenario two is a distillery where it's a passion project for the owner and they're trying to create a sustainable business where they want to have a legacy. It's going to be passed down from generation to generation. Those are two very different visions. And the KPIs that you're going to use to track and make sure you're on the right course will be different for those two scenarios. Distillery A who wants to be acquired, it's all about, oh, you're muted.
I was just like backing me up. I'm like, right, this makes sense. Keep going. What you're saying.
Well, like if you do just want to, go for that growth and get acquired, then you're going to be focused more on top line KPIs, right? Or, you're going to be looking at things like revenue and margin. And you're not necessarily going to be keeping an eye on the marketing budget, because you might blow the marketing budget out of the water because you're trying to blow up the brand and make it big. On the other hand, if you're building for succession planning and something that will be a legacy brand, then it's more about slow growth. It's about, managed growth, and something that is sustainable, but you're not looking to get attention to sell right away. And so it's more of the health of the company as opposed to maximizing the sales. So I'm going to start with that preface. Yeah.
No, obviously, I'm sure like the premise of the book is not. I know some folks who are just like in the former camp, right? We just want to be purchased. Some who are in the latter. Does your book spell out that between the former and the latter in terms of?
It talks about which KPIs might be more appropriate depending on what your values are, but it doesn't
That's a good way to put it.
It doesn't say, if you want to be sold, you need to focus on these, and if you want to have a legacy brand, focus on that.
Right. Of course,
But,
yeah.
It does have some of that in there. But to talk about the specifics within, some of my favorites that I think are very important. Number one is liquidity, and liquidity is just a measure of how able you are to pay your bills as they come due. I mean, are you going to run out of cash? That's really what it comes down to. So there's a couple ratios that I go through, like a quick ratio and cash, days of cash on hand. So those two ratios speak to, what is your cash burn? How much safety net of cash do you need to have in the bank? And that's really important, kind of regardless of where you are in that spectrum of values, because these are very near-term issues. You're going to need to make sure you've got significant liquidity regardless of which bucket you're in. And then another one is profitability. So this might be metrics like gross margin or EBITDA. And profitability is probably it needs to matter to everyone. However, it's more important to those who are focused on building a brand to sell, because you need to demonstrate to a buyer that, hey, we've got a profitable way to make our product.
Right. Of course, 100%. Yeah.
Are these just very briefly? Are these significantly different between different propositions between the brewing and the distilling side, or are they roughly the same?
In terms of the targets, yes. Okay, let me answer that two ways. The first way is what you're measuring. That's going to be the same for brewers and distillers, but what you would expect in terms of where that target ratio should be will be different. And an example of that is there's this ratio called the current ratio, and it takes your current assets divided by your current liabilities.
Wait,
so
can you repeat that? What ratio?
The current ratio.
Oh, current ratio. Okay. Well,
yeah.
And sorry,
that might have been my southern speak. Current.
Yeah, I actually thought you said Kirk, like somebody's name.
Right. That's why I wanted to repeat it.
I'm glad you asked. Okay.
But so the current ratio it basically takes like all your cash, all your accounts receivable, and all your inventory. You tally that up, and then you put that against all your accounts payable, all your credit card debt, all the like payroll liability, any of those short-term things. And it's a measure of the relationship between the two. So that's great. But if you think about the inventory that you have on the books, in the beer world, it's a much more quick turn. And in the distillery world, if you're doing anything that's aged, so obviously your targets are going to be different, because what you can expect, if you were just to look at the balance sheet of a brewery versus a distillery, the distillery is going to have massive amounts more of this inventory that's still aging, and it sits on the balance sheet for a long time. So if that inventory piece is part of the equation of the metric, you should expect a much different result for a distillery than you would for a brewery. So there are differences, but in terms of like the equations, those equations that you're looking at are similar, but the desired results are different.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So, yeah, so I guess that's a good follow-up question is in terms of evaporative losses. Does that factor in some of your financial equations that you have in the book, or?
I don't go into that in the book. I think of that as an operational metric that would, show you where you are operationally and could point to, especially if you're measuring that on a per brand metric or per spirit metric, you can get helpful information about how to change your operations and where things might need to be tweaked to get a better financial result. And that's another point that I wanted to make about finance. If there's ever, like, going back to the conversation about budget versus actual, if you identify that there's a discrepancy between your budgeted result and your actual result in a manufacturing environment, which is what distillers are, that discrepancy have an operational outcome.
And I use LPAs because I'm a terrible American, but most of your equations are based on PG or?
Operationally, yeah. But so financial metrics. A lot of the metrics that I talk about are just in dollars. But if you are talking operationally, yes, I speak in terms of proof gallons, but you can change that to your needs. Just like in beer, maybe you're going to talk in barrels, or maybe you're going to talk in CEs. But yeah, just whatever you're comfortable with, whatever the native language is.
Yeah. We just had we had our ops retreat last week at the distillery, and we visited a distillery or a brewery in town, and one of my distillers were like, "What is a barrel? Like, what? Why?" I was like, "It's 31 gallons," and they're like, "But why?" So 100%. We all have so many different metrics, but I think to your point, it's all back to the dollar value.
And talking about like how to express these metrics and which method of measurement is best. Again, it's like a communication piece. So I feel like my job is to take this financial data and couch it in a way, translate it into the language that makes sense to the person I'm talking to. So, to your point, if you're a person who thinks in terms of proof gallons, or you think in terms of barrels or whatever, I need to take the same actionable item and put it in terms that person's going to, that will resonate best with them.
Yeah, the resonate piece I think is really important. All right, so outside of RTDs, what are some other big heavy hitters that you've seen, either with startups or with established?
Just issues that I encounter with these businesses. Probably capitalization and anticipated growth rate, or expectations for growth. I'd say that's probably the area where I encounter the most dissonance between like myself and what I think is reasonable and normal versus client expectations. And so, if you've got, if you have a startup, and this is actually coming into play a lot more for me these days as spirits starts to take off and really, have this huge growth curve. With that, you see people get into the market who maybe they don't know anything about spirits, but it's come on their radar as this cool thing, and they want to get involved, and they want to start a spirits business, and they've got this vision of like, hey, we're going to start this business, and then we're going to, sell it, and this is really, really hot today. We need to get on this whiskey. Let's go whiskey. So then,
what? So can I just back up also, because I'm really interested in this whole, like, you started out in your career in brewing, and then now we're in distilling. So could you comment on what you've seen, the amount of breweries turning into distilleries? Because, right, you mentioned you're in Oregon, you're now in Cali, but have you seen that trend happen a lot?
Yeah, I have. So there's two main drivers that I see forcing that. One is consumer demand, and
Okay.
I'm sure we've all seen the data. If you look back the last 20 years, spirits is eating beer's lunch. It's like spirits is going up on a 1-to-1 ratio as beer's going down, and wine stays steady. So it's like I think a lot of people are seeing that this is the market trend, this is where it's going, and they don't want to miss out. So that's one thing. The other thing is with larger regional breweries, a lot of people overbuilt in the days when beer was going wild, and now they have a production facility that needs to be filled. So it's expanding into different products to, make the best use of those resources.
It
So
makes me nuts because it's the exact same thing happened in the late '90s. I watched it and now I'm seeing it again. And then
yeah.
nobody learned shit.
Well, it's really hard to take a disciplined approach when you see
Sure.
things that are growing fast. The entrepreneurial spirit. It's hard to turn away from that shiny object.
We had a question from Lee Wood. First off, he says, "Great book, Maria. I've been working through my copy for the last couple of weeks. Could you talk about how to value barrels that have been allocated to WIP, which I assume means work in progress? Yes."
Yeah. So it's that is interesting and complex. So there's a couple I don't know tranches of expenses that go into valuing WIP, which is your liquid that's in a barrel. How do you put a dollar value on that? And if you break it down, you can kind of start with the things that are identifiable and then work your way through to the more nuanced parts of the value. But obviously, from the very top, there's just the direct cost of the raw materials that is going into that barrel. And 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 what I'm about to explain is complex, and not every distiller out there will have the internal accounting knowledge to put this into place themselves. So I just want to put a little asterisk around what I'm about to say, and say take this with a grain of salt because it might not be practical for your organization. But anyway, so you start with those direct costs. That's the easy part. And then to that, you need to add in the cost of the labor that went into putting that liquid in a barrel, and the overhead that was associated with the production time to get that liquid into a barrel. So the overhead would be rent, utilities, insurance for the product, any kind of sort of ancillary thing that supports the liquid in the barrel. So all of those three different categories is the cost once it goes into the barrel. And then that's like half of the equation. The other half of the equation is how do you value that over the course of time? And over the course of time, like let's say you're talking 4 years to get to a finished product. Over the course of time, again, there are variables that are tangible. That's not the right word, but identifiable. And then there's variables that are more nuanced. So when you talk about the identifiable costs over the course of the 4 years, again, overhead, so rent. So like let's say that you calculate the rent per square foot in your facility and you figure out how much space a barrel takes up, and then you apply that cost at the end of every year. You apply part of that cost into that work in process. And same thing, I mean, this is again sort of a cost benefit analysis of how deep you want to go, but I'm kind of giving you the nth degree so you can understand the concept. You're talking about any sort of conditioning for like getting the environment correct, so utilities around that. All of these, the same types of overhead elements we consider to first get the liquid in the barrel, then you calculate that again over the course of time. So that's another nuanced thing. And then any labor as you're, checking on your product and just checking on it through the year. So that all has to be capitalized into it. Most people are going to do an annual adjustment to build that into the cost instead of doing it on a, it takes an adjustment. It's not something that you can do every day. Then you have, so that's how you get to the value of your WIP inventory. Another part of this is calculating the value that you should have as an insured value. Because the insured value is going to be the cost of the WIP, of the liquid that's sitting in barrels, but then you also need to take into account the fair value of that good. So it's two, and I'm getting pretty technical here, so forgive me and hang with me, but
no, this is the part I wanted to hear. The costs I can figure out. This I want to know about. Sorry.
Technical as much as you want. Yeah,
yeah, right. That's why we're here. We go where other shows don't.
From an accounting perspective, the value of the inventory on the books is going to be the cost, and that's everything that I just talked about. So I walked you through how to value the WIP that's on your balance sheet. But I also want to talk about the insured value, which is tangential to accounting. It's not accounting, but it is important for business, and I think it's important for this conversation. The insured value is going to take all of the costs that we just talked about, but then it also overlays this nuanced fair market value, because you want to insure for the fair market value of your product. If there was a fire, if it went away, how much money am I owed? So there's a delta there between all these identifiable costs along the way, and then now currently what it's worth. So you've got all the costs of 3 years, and let's say you're sitting here at year 3, so and the costs are here, the identifiable costs. Well, the fair market value of that might be here. And then let's go even further. Let's say, you crested the 4-year mark and now you're into something seriously aged, and now the costs are way up there. So that is something where I really recommend working with your insurance professional, because that's where you work with actuarial tables to figure out what is the fair value at this time. And I mean, a lot of us are going to have an idea of what that should be just from market knowledge, being in the industry and understanding what things are worth and what they're trading for. However, when it truly comes to what the insured value would be, you're going to bring in actuarial tables, and it's important to work with an insurance person who knows the space, because it is so nuanced in that. But again, just to put a bow on this, for your financial statements, for the balance sheet, that fair value piece doesn't play into it for accounting. Accounting is going to be cost basis, and cost basis is all of those identifiable costs along the way.
Okay. No, I think it's interesting that you need to find an insurer who understands this as well, obviously.
Yeah, and they're kind of few and far between. In my experience, the people who know the insurance side for this industry can be few and far between.
I would assume there's a lot of them in Kentucky. Really?
One of the best folks that I know is in Massachusetts.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then you get into considerations around how this affects your operations too. And I mean, the insurance piece, not to take us down a rabbit hole here, but the insurance piece is really fascinating, because it affects your production facility. It affects how you choose your physical layout. You want to have rick houses that are separated. So in other words, you don't want all your eggs in one basket from a risk perspective, because if there's a fire, then you're screwed. So you want to have multiple baskets, multiple smaller baskets, and then that decision is going to drive, your choice of production facility and how you think about where to be. It's also a tax planning opportunity as well, because for businesses, the more that you can kind of let's say that you're in some sort of high tax jurisdiction. I'm making it up. Let's say you are in Philadelphia or somewhere that's got a high tax, and you can have a small concentration of your operations there. But then if you can spread out where your property is located to maybe other counties or other jurisdictions with a lower tax rate, then you can start to maximize the tax benefits. So there's a lot that comes out of thinking through how you're going to have your physical footprint.
Wow, yeah. I remember I was talking to a brewer who was going into distilling back in the late 90s and who was talking about all the stuff that his insurance company wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and I mean, going back even further, a lot of what we know about what, like 1940s, 1950s era American distilleries is from those insurance maps, the fire insurance maps.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's got a long history. But so another thing that sort of led us down this conversation path was talking about what are the topics I'm talking about with my clients, and uh, so financing your company is another important one. And um, most folks, and this is not, I'm sure this is nothing new to your audience, but most folks are making their clear spirits first and self-manufacturing those, and then, also putting the liquid in barrels for aged spirits. But while their own self-produced aged spirits come to maturity, then they're, buying and doing some blending on their own and then
Sure.
releasing it. So
Sourcing. Yep. Some
that's
blending.
that's important for cash flow to make sure that you've got that cash coming through the door. Um, and a lot of people are choosing to really not even start their self manufacturing out of the gate. Instead, what they'll do is really just do some minor blending, or even buying a product and just marketing it with their own label. The intention of that is, if I start, a quote unquote distillery, and all I'm doing is creating a brand, marketing it, putting a label on it, and selling it, it gives me an opportunity to prove the concept in the market. And then once I've proven the concept in the market, at that point, then maybe I'll go and start doing my own production. But until that point, it minimizes the cash outlay that I, the founder, have to do. And then when I'm ready to build that production facility, I can then command a higher enterprise value, which means that when I am selling, like I'm going to sell 10% of
Yeah.
my company for some cash, I'm getting more cash for that 10% than I would have if I did this at the front end. So I'm seeing a lot of people do that as well when they're financing their company. It's a different business model, different way of thinking about it.
So we have just a couple minutes before we're wrapping up, but I just wanted to kind of hone in on that concept. So what is proof of concept?
Oh, it's like
Most brewers, right? Like we're selling whiskey, let's say again, like first 4 years ish, we're sourcing and doing all that, but like how does it affect everything?
so the idea is like, if I have an idea for a whiskey brand, and I okay, so we'll talk about peanut butter whiskey. Let's say I've got this idea
Why
for
not?
peanut. Let's
All
say
in.
I've got this idea, right? I've got this idea, and so I might want to test that out and see if there's actually an appetite for it in the market. So the proof of concept is the point of from the point of me introducing this into the market, that, and this is not a real example. I'm saying, let's assume that it was made by someone else. I have no idea how that brand came about. Anyway, assume it's made by somebody else, but I'm the marketing arm, and I'm going to take that product, bring it into the market, and see if it sells. And if it sells, then I've proven the concept. And at that point, then I can go and I might say, all right, there's something here, and I'm going to raise some money, and I'm going to do my own self production, and I'm really going to go all in at that point. So that's what I mean by proof of concept, of like proving that the market will bear and that there's an audience for it.
Oh, before we start to wrap up, there was one thing I wanted to get to, and that was when we were in the green room before the show. You and I discovered that we both liked the Emerald
Yeah.
from Ransom. Talk about why you like that whiskey.
Oh, I just love it. It is so smooth, and I'm not going to be able to articulate the characteristics
To
of
me,
it.
it is the closest thing to an Irish whiskey I've had made in America. I just think they did a really great job on it. And
Yeah,
I wish it got more play. And I was just really happy to see it on your list.
So the other one that was on there that and I'm curious from your audience, it's
Bainbridge.
Bainbridge organic
Yep.
whiskey. And I have only had that once. I cannot find it anywhere. And it is just the most awesome whiskey that I've ever had. And so curious from the audience if anybody knows of it, and more importantly, where I can find it. I probably have to go to Bainbridge, but
No, I've had there are other whiskeys. I haven't had the organic, but
yeah.
I mean, I'm generally impressed with Bainbridge. I like the stuff they do. So, but that's good to know that you like whiskey. Sorry. Is that other question one we can address, Liz?
About the agency, I feel like we kind of touched on that already.
Yeah, it almost seems more like a business directory question. An agency or outside source that can more accurately establish a fair market value for maturing barrels, especially now that the value of 4+ year old whiskey / bourbon has increased in double digits. Is there an agency that actually does that?
Not that I know of. I mean,
Okay.
I know people who broker liquid that is it at some phase of its maturation.
Well, that sure finds out the actual value, doesn't it?
Yeah. So, like, I know people who do this professionally, but it's not, an agency or some sort of.
Yeah, they're actually buying it. They're not telling you how much it's worth.
Well, they buy it and sell it.
Yeah.
Which could be all over the map.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I have a last question before we wrap up. So we already talked about whiskey, but your favorite way to drink whiskey?
Oh, yeah.
Man, I just like it with one large cube.
Large cube. No classic cocktail, no classic Maria cocktail that you like?
Not really. No, I'm not really a cocktail person. I mean, an old fashioned is great, but I might be saying this to the wrong audience, but I think sometimes cocktails is just covering up, a sort of filler, and I just like the pure thing. I just like to sit my liquor, and unless it's like vodka, even with vodka, my preferred way to drink that is just with tonic. So I'm pretty simple. I don't like a lot of stuff.
Okay. All right. Hey, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I obviously do. I'm all in.
Yeah, I got asked recently. I checked into a hotel under the Whistle Pig moniker, and they're like, "Do you drink whiskey though?" And I'm like,
Sorry.
It's fine. That's the appropriate response. That was the response I needed to say. I make it for a living. Like, this is what I do, obviously. Anyhow, Maria, it's been such a pleasure to have you on.
Great show. Thank you.
It's been a great show. For everyone out there, again, we love our green rectangulars. So it's there at the bottom of the screen. Please give it a click. That's the link to Maria's new book.
Oh, yeah.
However, if you're a brewer and happenstance to be on the show, where can we find the brewing book?
That is on the BA's website, brewersassociation.org, or Amazon. Both are on Amazon.
Okay. So you heard it. Either click the green rectangle, or go on BA, or go on Amazon. But please go check out Maria's books. But I think that's it. We don't actually have a physical guest lined up for next session, but
we will. We will.
So July 5th is our next session. And so come back and join us then. Until then, Maria, thank you so much.
Thank you. Great show. Thank you.
Special shout out to Eric Owens. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.